They do not want you to know this. Howard Storm did not just come back to life after death. He returned with a secret capable of changing everything. He saw what none of us is ready for, what is hidden, what can happen at any moment. But most people never even think about it. His revelations force us to seriously wonder what awaits us after the heart stops beating. Howard Storm was an ordinary man, a man of science. He taught art at a university, headed a department, and was respected by colleagues and students alike. For him, only logic, facts, and evidence mattered. In a world ruled by reason, he felt completely confident. He did not believe in God, and he considered the afterlife an invention for the weak. He did not just reject religion, he openly mocked it in his lectures. He easily destroyed any argument of believers, insisting that after the final breath, only emptiness awaits a person. He saw himself as the master of his fate, a full-fledged architect of his own life, a man who had answers to every question. But soon, he would have to face a question that would overturn his entire worldview. What he saw beyond life destroyed everything he used to believe. He looked into a place where no one dares to look. He learned what no one is ready for, and now he wants to share it with you. In those years, Howard, together with his wife and a group of students, went on a 3-week journey through Europe. It was not just a vacation, it was an educational trip. He dreamed of showing his students masterpieces of world art, inspiring them with new ideas and discoveries. They wandered the streets of Rome, admired the grandeur of Florence's cathedrals, breathed in history in Berlin. The last city before returning to the United States was Paris. For Howard, this city was something special, the embodiment of art, culture, and intellectual life, but he did not yet know that it was there that he would face an ordeal that would change everything. The day started as usual. He woke up in the hotel room, stretched, looked at his wife, who was still sleeping. But suddenly something was wrong. In his stomach appeared a strange feeling, as if something was burning inside. At first he did not pay attention, thinking he had simply overeaten the night before. But after several hours, the strange discomfort turned into sharp pain. He tried to distract himself, went outside to walk, but the pain only grew, spreading like fire, consuming his entire body. By evening, the pain became unbearable. Howard felt as if he was being torn apart from the inside. He clutched his stomach, but it did not help. At some point, the pain became so strong that he could no longer stand. He collapsed onto the floor of the hotel room, writhing in agony. The feeling was as if molten metal inside was burning him through. He tried to scream, but his throat seized up in spasm. His wife, in panic, called an ambulance. He was urgently taken to the hospital. When they brought him to the emergency room, he was barely conscious. The doctor examined him and gave the diagnosis: perforated stomach ulcer. It was life-threatening. Inside him a hole had formed, and gastric juice began to eat away at tissues. There was only one option left: urgent surgery. But there was a terrible detail. That day there was no surgeon in the hospital. He could not believe it. How could this be? A huge city, the capital of France, and no surgeon. He lay in the ward waiting for help, but no one came. His wife rushed through the corridors. Someone could have saved him, but the answers did not change. The doctor is not here yet. Hours passed. He tried to endure, but the pain left him no choice. It rolled in waves, tearing him from the inside, forcing every cell in his body to scream. He was not given painkillers. He could not sleep, could not even breathe normally. In his mind spun a single thought: will I really die like this? In a cold ward, in a foreign city, abandoned to fate? He looked at his wife. There were tears in her eyes, but she did everything she could to stay strong. He knew she did not want to panic, did not want to show fear. But both of them understood. There was almost no time left. At some point he felt all his strength finally leave him. His breathing became shallow. He could fight no longer. He took his wife's hand in his own and quietly said, I am dying. His body went limp. The last thing he heard was his wife's voice calling for the doctors. Then came darkness. A strange feeling, like a dream, but at the same time it all seemed more real than ever before. In a single moment, all the pain disappeared. Just a minute ago, he had been writhing in agony, feeling his body tearing apart from unbearable pain. But now around him there was complete calm. He did not understand where he was. In front of his eyes was still the hospital room, but something about it looked wrong. The air felt too dense, and time froze like water seized by ice in a gust of cold wind. He looked around and saw a bed. Someone was lying on it. He stepped closer, and his heart sank. It was himself, his own body, motionless, pale, foreign. He looked at himself but no longer felt connected to this body. It was only a discarded shell, a broken doll whose thread of life had snapped. Howard tried to take a deep breath, but suddenly realized he no longer needed air. His chest did not rise or fall. He felt neither warmth nor cold. He was not afraid, but inside him grew a strange incomprehension. How was this possible? Can a person be in two places at once? At that moment he heard sobs. He turned and saw his wife. She was sitting next to his body, holding his lifeless hand. In her eyes was horror, pain, and bottomless despair. She called to him but did not see that he was standing right there, just a few steps away. He tried to speak, to touch her, but his hands passed through the air as if he were only a shadow, an echo of who he used to be. Panic began to rise in his chest. What is happening? Is he dead? No, it cannot be. He was still here. He thought, he felt, he heard, but no one noticed him. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a whisper. It came from the corridor. Muffled, drawn-out voices were chanting his name like a song. He turned sharply to the door. The hospital corridor was plunged in darkness. Strange. He remembered that the light had been on there. But now before him stretched a thick, disturbing darkness, inside which something was moving. Figures. Several silhouettes stood in the passage, not moving, but he felt their presence. They were waiting. The voices became clearer, softer. We are here. Come with us. Their tone was calm, almost gentle. They spoke as if they had known him for many years, as if they had long been waiting for this meeting. In their words was something friendly and at the same time insistent, but Howard felt something strange, subtly wrong. He took a step forward. Maybe they were doctors. Maybe they had finally come to take him for surgery. Everything around him felt so unreal that he could not think clearly. His head spun from what was happening. Thoughts tangled, and the shadows kept calling him. He slowly moved toward them. He did not know where this path would lead, but he had no doubt. He had to follow them. The further he walked, the deeper the darkness became. The faint light of the hospital lamps, which just a minute ago had lit the corridor, disappeared as if it had never existed. At first he thought he had just entered a poorly lit section, but the darkness grew thicker, wrapping around him like dense, cold fog. Everything around seemed blurry, as if he no longer existed. There was a strange feeling that he was floating in endless blackness, and yet still walking forward. The voices that had once sounded gentle now changed. They became dry, commanding, with no hint of warmth. There was no more comforting tone, only an order, the shout of a commander. "Do not stop! We have no time." In these words was anxiety, but not for him, for something else, something hidden. Howard suddenly felt a stirring of worry in his chest. If that feeling was still alive inside him, his whole being told him, something is wrong. Inside, everything screamed, "Stop! Turn back! Run!" But where could he run? From what? There was no visible way back. Behind him stretched the same endless darkness as ahead. "Where are we going?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound steady, but his own words trembled in the heavy silence. The answer came immediately, sharp, almost irritated. Be silent and walk. He slowed his steps. In that order was something that planted even more fear inside him. "We are almost there," said one of them, but now the voice was strange, icy, full of hidden threat. Howard instinctively stopped, as if he felt it was the last moment when he could still change something. The steps of those who led him fell silent. They were no longer ahead. They surrounded him on all sides, and suddenly they attacked. The darkness around him came alive. It closed in on him as if invisible hands emerged from the void. They grabbed him. Icy, slippery fingers dug into his skin, pulled at his arms and legs, tore his clothes, leaving bloody scratches. He could not see their faces, but he felt them. There were many of them, at least dozens, maybe hundreds. They hissed. They rejoiced. He tried to break free, but there were too many. They knocked him to the ground. Laughter. This laughter was the worst sound he had ever heard. Muffled, distorted, filled with twisted delight. They savored his torment. They mocked him. Howard screamed, trying to fight back, but his voice was swallowed by the silence. It seemed no one heard his cry. No one would come to help. His body burned from pain. His mind began to fade. He could not fight any longer. His strength was gone. His arms went limp. He collapsed to the ground, broken, defeated, ready to give up. And suddenly, through this hell, he heard a voice, quiet, weak, but clear. The voice told him to pray. He had not prayed for many years, except for that distant childhood when he mindlessly repeated words his parents taught him. Back then, prayers seemed to him an empty ritual, just words repeated by adults. Over the years he had stopped taking them seriously. He did not believe in God. For him, faith was only weakness, an attempt to run from reality. He trusted only science, facts, and logic. But now he stood in the deepest darkness, torn apart, broken, paralyzed by fear, and he had no choice left. The voice inside him repeated again, "Pray." But how? He did not remember the words. They had been erased over the long years of his skepticism. In despair, he tried to grasp at any familiar words he could remember from long ago. He recalled the childhood evening prayers he used to whisper before sleep. The words came out broken, clumsy, without forming clear phrases. He did not know if he was saying them correctly, but it did not matter. He clung to them like a last lifeline in a raging ocean. And suddenly, he felt that something around him began to change. Those who tormented him began to freeze. Their sharp claws, which had just been tearing at his skin, suddenly loosened. Their voices, full of malice and mockery, began to fade. The laughter vanished. For the first time he heard complete silence, dense, tense. Then the darkness began to disperse. In the distance, something appeared. At first it was a barely visible faint glimmer, like a tiny candle in the black void. But the light grew brighter. It did not just drive away the darkness. It seemed to breathe, to live, to fill all the space around. The light expanded, and with it came a feeling Howard had never known before. It was warmth, but not physical, not the kind felt on the skin. It was a warmth that penetrated inside, wrapped him from within, and embraced his entire being. He felt love, true, ancient, powerful. Love unlike anything earthly. In this light, there was no judgment, no reproach, no anger. Only complete acceptance, only a soft, endlessly kind call. And at that moment, scenes from his life began to unfold before him. They did not just flash. He relived them, feeling everything as if it was happening again. He saw himself as a teenager shouting at his mother, accusing her of not understanding him when all she wanted was to help. He remembered how he once humiliated his father, throwing harsh words at him that he had long forgotten. He saw himself at the university, how he spoke condescendingly about his students, mocked their uncertainty, emphasized his superiority. He saw episodes where he deliberately caused pain and did not think it mattered. Now he understood. His own ego had blinded him. All those years he had been proud of his titles, his intellect, his place in society. He built his life by his own rules, but now he was shown none of that mattered. No medals, no recognition, no status. Here everything was measured by only one thing: what kind of person he was, and he realized it was exactly how he treated others that brought him here. The next moment he came to. He inhaled sharply like a man who had been underwater for a long time and suddenly broke through to the surface. But something was strange. The world around him looked dull, the colors faded, the sounds muffled. He blinked, trying to focus his gaze, and realized he was in a hospital. A nurse leaned over him, saying something, but her words reached him as if through a thick layer of water. He felt heaviness in his body. Every movement was difficult, as if he had become a doll stuffed with lead. He was alive. He tried to remember what had happened to him. Everything around seemed unreal. Could someone just wake up after everything he had gone through? But his heart was beating. He felt the cold of the sheets, heard the steady hum of the equipment. He was back in the world he knew. In this world the laws of physics applied. Everything could be weighed and explained. But now he knew there was another world too. Suddenly he saw his wife. She sat by his bed, holding his hand tightly. Her eyes were red from tears, her face tired after many sleepless nights. She looked at him without turning away. In her gaze were both relief and exhaustion. He tried to speak. His voice came out hoarse, uncertain. "I have to tell you everything." The words were torn, the thoughts tangled, but he knew for sure he could not remain silent. He began to speak about that darkness, about the creatures that tormented him, about the pain and fear, about how he was certain it was the end, about the voice that told him to pray, about the light, the warmth, the love that could not be expressed in words, about how his life had unfolded before him, and he realized that everything he had believed before was a lie. His wife listened in silence. On her face remained calm, but when he finished she only quietly shook her head. "You need to rest." In her voice was gentleness, but also doubt. She decided he was delirious, that it was just the effects of anesthesia, the game of a dying mind. But he knew for sure. All of it was more real than his entire previous life, more real than the lectures he had given for decades, more real than money, positions, and success. He could no longer live the old way. It had become impossible. He felt that everything in him had changed. He was no longer the man who had stepped into that hospital room just a few days ago. Everything he had thought true had collapsed. Science, facts, evidence. All of that now seemed secondary. He had seen the truth hidden beyond the material world. And now he understood. Life was not just biology. Life was preparation. Several weeks later, after recovering from the surgery, he made a firm decision. He left the university. His colleagues were shocked. They could not understand what had happened. Howard Storm, one of the most hardened skeptics, suddenly gave up the science to which he had devoted his entire life. Why? He did not try to explain. Those who had not seen what he had seen would never understand anyway. He only knew one thing. Now he belonged to God. And now he knew for certain. Life is given to us to prepare for eternity, and when that moment comes, each will face the consequences of their deeds.